What is going on, everybody? I hope you're having a good day today. This is Alex from the Fresh Fantasy Podcast, and this is the 25th episode of Season 3. Today, we're going to be talking about our must-have players. These are 10 guys that we want the absolute most in our fantasy football drafts right now, and we'll be breaking down and debating the case for each player. Joining me today to break this all down is a man who has been called the Fantasy Football Rocket Man because of how fast he's moved up in this industry. Although he does not like this nickname, he is the Rocket Man. Last year, he rose to be the director of analytics at Roto Underworld. This year, to being the director of both fantasy and gambling at one of the biggest fantasy companies in the world. He's as talented as he is handsome. He is the 33rd team's Josh Larky. Welcome back to the show.
Alex, thanks for having me. Let's do a little background information though before we get started.
Please.
It's not all roses and sunshine. Alex sends over the show sheet and he says, "Hey, just let me know if I took your players." And of course, he took most of my players. Me being the gracious guest, decided not to steal some of these players back. So I just want everyone to know that that is out in the air and that these are not just Alex's players. Some of them are my players too. So I want to take responsibility for some of these players, and if they perform well, that's on me, not on Alex. But
Great.
As long as everyone's aware of that, I'm excited to be here. We can dive in.
I'm excited to dive in, but real quick, something that's funny for context. So we're recording this in July of 2022. We met 11 months ago, and 11 months ago, you had just 6,000 followers on Twitter, and you are now at over 22,000. You weren't even at 10K when we met. And here you are, not even a year later, at over 20,000. At the time when I was doing this with you, I think I was at 1,000. Like I had just hit 1,000 followers, I think, when we met. So it's crazy the progression. But can you believe that you're up over 17,000 followers now in the last year?
Can't believe it. I honestly wasn't even sure what we were at. But I mean, on your end, you're about to hit 10K. It'll happen sometime mid-July. So we're rising up together.
Hey, that's what we do. That's what we do. But again, you know who else is rising up? These must-have players. Well, we hope these players will rise up, because if they don't, then maybe I'm going to be out of a job and people are going to stop listening to us on shows. But with that being said, let's jump into these 10 players that are absolute must-haves for the season. Josh, we will start with you. Who is your first must-have player?
So I know a lot of people out there, they talk about how the money is won at the end of the season, which I agree. You really want your players to perform well at the end of the season. However, at a certain point in the draft, we should also target players that are just going to score an absolute truckload of fantasy points early on in the season and maybe even later on in the season. And that leads to a wide receiver that I am snagging in as many drafts as possible. You can often get him in the 7th, 8th, 9th, 10th round, depending on what kind of group you're drafting in. And it's Russell Gage. Last year, Russell Gage had a 22% target share for the Atlanta Falcons. That's really, really good. For a little context, that's several percentage points higher than someone like CeeDee Lamb. Russell Gage is certifiably good at football. He was not a college wide receiver. He has been learning the position in the NFL. He has taken noticeable strides forward each year in the NFL. So you might say, oh, this free agent wide receiver with no draft capital, who didn't do anything in college, why would I ever invest in this guy when he's already been in the league for several years? And it's because this is the archetype of a late bloomer. This is the archetype of the guys like the Adam Thielens. Generally, they do not start off lighting the world on fire. Russell Gage basically showed us what he was capable of last season when he out-targeted phenom Kyle Pitts. He's playing with Tom Brady. Tom Brady threw the ball 4 or 5 more times a game than any other quarterback in the entire NFL last season. He's going to do it again this year. Chris Godwin is out for, I would say, at least 6 games, potentially 10 to 12 games with the ACL injury. Mike Evans has not been a target hog for about 5 seasons. Antonio Brown is gone. Gronk retired. The clear number 2 option for at least the first half of the season in Tom Brady's offense can be had generally in the 8th round. You need Russell Gage.
I love that. I like Russell Gage, but do you worry at all about like what he looks like when Godwin comes back? Like, I know, okay, he's coming off an ACL. The first game back from ACL, he's not going to, Russell Gage will still be targeted. But do you worry about what things look like maybe in the fantasy playoffs potentially with the target share that you think you can get? Or are you looking at this as, okay, last year Tom Brady was 8 attempts away from throwing the most passes in NFL history. They're going to throw the ball at a ridiculous rate. They had enough involvement for AB, Gronk, Mike Evans, and Chris Godwin. Russell Gage will be fine.
Yeah, the way I see it is there were always at least 3 relevant pass catching types
Yep.
on a month-to-month basis. And that,
Yep.
yes, sometimes AB was in and then either Evans or Godwin was taking a hit, but there was also Gronk in there. Generally, there were 2 to 3 guys popping off every single week, sometimes 3 to 4 if you want to count Leonard Fournette as well. So
Definitely.
because of that, I really just don't have big concerns about him in the fantasy playoffs. That's a very far time away. All I know is that he's going to be tied to Tom Brady in the fantasy playoffs. For all we know, he could be the guy that goes off one of those weeks.
Yeah.
Am I going to project him as highly once Godwin comes back? No, of course not. But if you're telling me that in the 8th round, I'm getting a guy that I think has a really strong case for 15 fantasy points a game, and then come the fantasy playoffs, and when it's week to week, any given week, he can give you 20, 25 fantasy points. That's exactly the type of player that I want on my team.
I love that. I love that. Another player that's the exact type of player that I want on my team, and I already have on some teams, is Travis Etienne. I mean, he's one of 12 running backs ever to earn a 90-plus grade from Next Gen Stats, and 100% of those running backs to earn a 90-plus grade have a top 12 finish in fantasy football. The only running back to not finish in the top 12 that had that 90-plus grade is Travis Etienne, who's not played a snap in the NFL, and Breece Hall, who has not played a snap in the NFL. We'll talk about him later. But it has a 100% hit rate for people that have had this. He would be a historical outlier. There's 10 other players to do it. Every single one of them has had a top 12 finish in fantasy football. Also, Etienne in his last college season in 2020 had the second highest college yards per route run of all time. The only running back to finish higher, Christian McCaffrey. He also led the NCAA in broken tackles in 2019 and 2020. Etienne did. He's looked healthy in camp. His team has talked about him as their version of Deebo Samuel. If this guy is healthy and he's had over a year by the time the season starts to recover from this foot injury, the Lisfranc injury, which is dangerous, all signs are pointing great things for Etienne. He would be a historical outlier. Whether he hits this season or not, he is going to hit sometime, and it looks like that he may do it, especially with James Robinson coming off an Achilles, and we don't know when he's going to come back. Is Etienne one of these guys that you wanted on your list, or is he someone that you're more off of?
Yeah, he was going to be the first name on my list. So, of course, it was great to see that he was the first name on your list.
Of course.
I'll add a couple things in
Please.
terms of why I really like Etienne. I think one, just in terms of an analog, think about DeAndre Swift last year. The reasons people were fading Swift, why Swift wasn't going in the second round of fantasy drafts. Pretty much all those reasons apply to Etienne. Health, workload concerns. The offense might not be so good, but the archetype is exactly what we want for fantasy football. Fast, going to get red zone and goal line work, and heavily targeted in the passing game.
Yep.
That is how running backs score fantasy points. I pretty much do not look at their carries between the 20s. Those do not score fantasy points. Notice that Derrick Henry and Nick Chubb are 2 of the 5 best running backs in the NFL, and they get more carries than almost everyone. You need to work really, really hard if you want to be that archetype that's a between the 20s grinder that's going to be fantasy relevant. Most of them just aren't. And that's why I love Etienne. I even don't want my running back, if possible, to get those carries because they're low fantasy points, high injury risk when you're running the ball up the middle. So I love that Etienne's going to score his fantasy points efficiently. Think DeAndre Swift. Think Alvin Kamara in terms of how he's going to get it done. So, yeah, I think he's just a slam dunk in the 4th, 5th round where he goes.
Slam dunk on a fantasy football podcast. You love to see it. Josh, who is your second must-have player?
So there's few things in fantasy that are consistent from year to year to year to year. This is a 4-year trend. This is a player's 4-year career. Lamar Jackson has led the NFL in quarterback rush attempts per game all 4 years that he has played. The past 3 seasons, if you look, it has been 11, 11, and 11. Remarkably consistent how many rush attempts he has per game, and those score fantasy points. Lamar Jackson had the most fantasy points per game by a quarterback ever in 2019. He was playing with rookie Marquise Brown, second year Mark Andrews, Mark Ingram in the backfield. That was about it. Willie Snead was playing heavy snaps for them. This was just not the best looking set of characters on paper. I would say this year probably looks better. I know Dobbins might start slow with the injury from last year, but I would say that young 23, 24-year-old J.K. Dobbins is much better than the 30 or 31-year-old Mark Ingram from 2019. I think that's pretty certain. I would say that Bateman going into year 2 is better than rookie Hollywood Brown. And I would say that Andrews at this point in his career is far better than year 2 Mark Andrews. This is just an overall better environment. Lamar Jackson is better as now he's been in the NFL longer. He's shown noticeable strides forward in the passing game. And I don't quite understand why he can't just do what he did in 2019 all over again. And if you're telling me that the guy on paper has everything that you want to see and the guy that just broke fantasy football in 2019, then I'm going to keep drafting that guy. I think he has a very, very obvious path to be the QB1 in fantasy. I think he should be the clear QB2 off the board after Josh Allen. And he's not. Generally, you'll have Mahomes and Herbert going before him. Sometimes even someone like Kyler or Hurts goes before him. And I really think Lamar Jackson is the clear-cut QB2 for 2022.
It's funny you say that because I actually have him as my QB3. I have him both over Patrick Mahomes and Justin Herbert. I actually have Kyler ranked above him. I've gone back and forth. It depends on what side of the bed I wake up on, whether I'm going Kyler or Lamar that day. But I have those guys back to back. I think they should be the clear 2 and 3, like you said. 11 rush attempts per game. He's playing with a lot better weapons than he's played with. And again, people love to talk about that. Oh, like this guy's, he's always hurt, running. And it's just straight up not true. Lamar's a baller. He plays week in and week out. And I think that he has some of the best weapons he's ever had this year, which is still not saying a ton, but Mark Andrews is a beast. I'm a huge person that's very in on Rashad Bateman and someone that with Lamar Jackson, I think is going to do a lot of really great things. And you know what? He actually has this funny thing called a running game this year, potentially, that he didn't have last year to help open up the field for him. I'm sorry to disrespect the corpse of Latavius Murray, Le'Veon Bell, and, Devontae Freeman, but those guys are not as talented as your Gus Edwards and J.K. Dobbins, regardless if they're coming off ACL. I absolutely love Lamar Jackson this year. Excuse me, I don't know where Chris Godwin's saying, because Chris Godwin's one of my least favorite players. But on that topic of wide receivers that I do love, how about Amon-Ra St. Brown? He's the guy for me that I absolutely am in love with, and I'm just falling more in love with every day. And, some people are probably ready to click off the podcast and say, oh, here we go. The small sample size guy is coming in and, about to talk about his finish for last season. But let's not talk about that at all. Let's not even mention his last season. Let's build a case around him purely off everything else but his final 6 weeks. And that starts with the fact that he had an 80-plus PFF grade as a rookie. 100% of players to hit an 80-plus PFF grade as a rookie had a top 12 season in fantasy by their 4th year in the NFL. Why did I say that by the 4th year? Because 13 of the 15 players to get an 80-plus PFF grade have hit a top 12 season. The only players who haven't are Elijah Moore and Terry McLaurin, both extremely talented players that everyone would agree with, and they're the only guys not to hit. Every other player on this list hit a top 12 season by their 4th year. So if Amon-Ra St. Brown doesn't work out, he is a historical outlier in this already. He was also, like I mentioned, I said I wouldn't say, the wide receiver 5 in fantasy football for a whole half of a season. It wasn't 4 games or 5 games. It was literally an 18-week season. And from weeks 10 through 18, he was the wide receiver 5 behind the top 4 wide receivers for the year. For the year, he was a rookie. And then the second half of the year, he was the wide receiver 5 behind only Cooper Kupp, Justin Jefferson, Devontae Adams, and Deebo Samuel. Did I also mention he's elite at commanding targets? He had an elite 21.4% target share as a rookie. He was targeted at an even higher rate in the end zone at 23.7%. This guy commands volume every single day of the week and twice on Tuesdays. He is absolutely amazing. And also, how about one more funny stat? It's an arbitrary stat. The Lions won 3 games this year. Every game that they won, Amon-Ra St. Brown had at least 10 targets. That's not changing in 2022. A breakout, even more so than last year, is incoming for Amon-Ra St. Brown.
So he was someone where I told you before the show, I said, you know what, Amon-Ra, didn't really like him. I've been warming up to him. I'm now neutral. I think you have officially sold me on Amon-Ra St. Brown. So we're gonna flip the exposure in my best ball drafts, redraft, etc. from roughly even with the field. I'm gonna try and be a little bit above the field. Maybe instead of roughly 8% Amon-Ra on my teams, I think I'm going for 10 to 12%. You've pushed me there. But I have to say one thing.
Go
What
ahead.
is the expression? Something, 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 and twice on Tuesdays. He
I
doesn't
don't.
play on Tuesdays. Don't we want twice on Sundays? What
True.
what
Yeah,
is
it
this?
should be
What is
twice
this
on
twice on
Sunday.
Tuesdays? Twice
The-
on his rest days?
yeah.
He's gonna rest twice as hard after the football week.
Well, because of how many targets he's getting, he's going to
Mhm.
have to rest twice as hard because when you're getting, 10 plus targets every single game, you have no choice but to get twice as much rest as you normally would when you're commanding such a big workload. But I'm sold on him. Deontay Johnson was one of those guys last year that I was just like, everything is pointing to the fact that this guy is going to like be really good this year or in the near future. And he did that. Does that mean he'll be right this time? Absolutely not. But again, 100% hit rate by their fourth year. Mark it down, Amon-Ra St. Brown. He is coming for this season. But Josh, enough about him. Who is your third must-have player?
So before I do that, I'm actually going to commandeer the podcast and steer it
Please
back
do.
for a second. Where are you at on Deontay this year? I know he's someone that we both loved last year. I am mostly out on him.
I'm out on him.
His 3-4 type turn ADP.
Yeah.
Okay. Do you mind saying that?
Yeah.
Let's just we'll take a break from must-have players. I'm curious because we were two of the biggest Deontay Johnson proponents that I was aware of last year.
Yeah, 100%.
And apparently we're both out on him this year. So what changed for you?
I think it's just more of it's not really the target competition or the fact that like he is literally 7-11 always open every time he's on the field. I think it's just more I'm a little bit more worried about what their quarterback play looks like this year. And I also notable over the last 5 seasons and last year, Pittsburgh threw the ball at the quickest rate in the entire NFL. Like they're known for their quick passes and doing that. I think that was partially with Big Ben. And I just think that when you have guys like Mitchell Trubisky or Kenny Pickett, that just might not be the same thing. And I know that again, Trubisky supported Allen Robinson as a top 10 wide receiver in back-to-back seasons. I just think that there's other people right now that I'd rather be drafting, like your Michael Pittmans of the world, or Cortland Sutton, Brandon Cooks. I'm just a little bit more in on those guys' ceilings than I am out on Deontay specifically.
Yeah, I think the quarterback's really, really concerning. Thanks, Jordan, my first hire at the 33rd team, our new head of DFS. Thanks for tuning in. Yeah, I think it's mostly Kenny Pickett for me. I do think he's gonna be the clear target leader, but is he gonna get quite the same target share? Little bit less confident in that. And rookie quarterbacks generally just do not help high-end fantasy production be had in that offense. And I think it is pretty crowded. And I'm not saying crowded like too many mouths to feed, like he can't get enough targets. More so that there's enough good players that I think the Steelers in a potential rebuilding year are going to want to see what they can do. That I think it wouldn't surprise me if he got a 90% snap share instead of basically 100% this year. So I think there's just so many factors that shift away from Deontay Johnson getting the nearly 30% target share on like a top 5 pass attempts per game level. But I think he could still have a top 10 target share in the NFL.
Yeah, but he doesn't. But even so, he doesn't even have to have a top 10. It could be outside that, and that's why I'm partially maybe I should be more in on him because he led the NFL last year in routes run. Like he was also second. I think he was second in like routes run per dropbacks. Like anytime they were throwing on the field and he wasn't in the blue tent, like he was on the field. And he also led the NFL in routes run last year. So even if he doesn't command, a target share of 30%, he's still going to be on the field at such a high rate. I just worry, again, it's just more, and I think for both of us, it sounds like there's other guys we'd rather have in that range. It's not as much I hate Deontay or I don't want him. I still love him. It's just more guys that are in that range. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think he's going to be a wide receiver too.
Yep, I agree. I think he's going to be a wide receiver too.
He's going to be like the wide receiver 15 in the NFL. And it's not like it's bad to draft him in terms of where he's going to finish. Yep. What you want to do though is find the guys that
are going to win your league,
that have the wide receiver 2 price who score like a wide receiver 1. Cooper Kupp, Jamar Chase, Deebo Samuel last year. I just don't see that path for Deontay. It's much more muddled for me than some of the other guys in that range. So it seems like we're on the same page.
Agree. If I don't see a top 10 finish, like in the range of outcomes, really, I'm probably not going to do it. And Deontay at best could be the wide receiver 10 probably. And I'd rather target guys like Michael Pittman that I think could be the wide receiver 5 or someone higher like that. And that's exactly what we're targeting. But let's get back to these must-have players. Josh, you are leading off with your third must-have player right now.
Yeah, apparently people have soured on this guy. His ADP has plummeted on every platform I have seen because he had a little bit of a hamstring issue, which it seems like he's now pretty much behind It's Sky Moore. And some might
Yeah.
say, well, you know what? Sky Moore was a second round pick. Second round picks, their rookie seasons on average aren't great. I agree. Second round pick rookie seasons aren't great. However, we're always dealing with these really, really small samples in the NFL. And I think one thing that we have to do sometimes is we have to dive in and look at the actual situation from a logical perspective when we have somebody like Andy Reid calling the plays, who I would say is not just logical, but he's really, really clever. He's creative. He is someone that I truly think knows who his good players are. And I think you can see that with someone like Mecole Hardman, where Mecole Hardman's been a pretty bad player. And sure enough, he has not forced Mahomes to give Hardman 7, 8, 9 targets a game just because they put second round draft capital into him. I think he kind of understands that. It's same with Clyde Edwards-Helaire. It was a bonehead move to let Mahomes hand select his round 1 running back. But if the guy's not performing, he doesn't see the field at a bell cow rate. Yeah. I really trust Andy Reid, and I trust that he's going to recognize that Sky Moore is the ascending player on the Chiefs offense. If we look at the other guys in this offense, we have Travis Kelce, who is my tight end 1 this year. I love Travis Kelce. I assume you do. I don't know anyone out there who just hates Travis Kelce. However, Travis Kelce turns 33 in October. If anything, he has plateaued, or he is slightly declining from the best fantasy tight end in the NFL to barely the best fantasy tight end in the NFL. I don't know. However you want to slice it, Kelce's not getting better. He's stagnating or getting worse. Juju Smith-Schuster has not been really good by the advanced metrics since 2018. I just do not understand how people keep making the case for Juju and go, oh, but have you seen his year 2 in 2018? I'm like, 2018? You mean the time when Michael Thomas was in like year 2 and tearing it up? 2018 is so far away. I'm pretty sure Todd Gurley was high-end RB1 that year, if I remember correctly. This is eons ago that we're talking about. Do you remember 2018? I couldn't care less about 2018 at this point.
Agreed.
There is nothing in his profile that suggests he will ever do anything remotely close to that again. PFF has thought he has been honestly bad the last few years. Yes, he was fantasy relevant 2 years ago. However, that was once again with Ben Roethlisberger throwing the ball a crazy amount of times, and Juju was the short slot option for a quarterback with no arm strength who was just getting the ball out quickly. Patrick Mahomes is not that. He does not want to check the ball down. That's why these running backs on the team don't get a lot of targets. All right, we've already ruled out Juju. We've ruled out Kelce. MVS, career high target share has been 14%. He has a career catch rate below 50%. And you might say, Josh, I think you don't realize, though, he is playing with Patrick Mahomes. And to that, I would counter that you don't realize he has been playing with Aaron Rodgers his whole career. So if the guy is catching fewer than half his passes, commanding very, very few targets, playing with Aaron Rodgers, I am inclined to think he's going to look exactly the same playing with Mahomes. Maybe the total numbers tick up a tiny bit because they pass more, but I think his actual share of the offense is pretty locked in. He's going to get 12 to 14% of this offense. Yeah. And then the final guy is Mecole Hardman. He is a bust. I don't think we should talk about him too much. The ADOT, basically everything, like ADOT, yards per reception. If you want to look at anything that involves big plays, explosiveness, touchdowns, it has all come down precipitously year over year over year in his 3 seasons. He went from the field stretcher, which I think has value in the Mahomes offense and why people are drafting MVS, to I am the gadget player situationally in the offense, and they realize he's very, very limited. Sky Moore is the ascending player. To make the case for Sky Moore, since at this point I have just dunked on every single Chiefs player, Sky Moore, he was a quarterback and a cornerback in high school. He gets a full scholarship to Western Michigan, and they say, we don't even know what position to put you at. We think you're good at football. Do you want to try receiver? He says, okay. And he ends up leading the team in receiving yards as a true freshman, having never played the position before. He had over 800 yards. Year 2, he averages more yards per game, plays only a few games. COVID happens. Their season's canceled. Comes back in year 3. He leads the MAC conference in touchdowns. He has over 100 receiving yards a game and declares for the NFL draft and gets taken round 2. A small school early declare wide receiver who only played 2.5 college seasons due to COVID. That's all you need to know right there to go, wow, this is not the type of profile that we ever see, because you never see small school receivers declaring early. And when they do, they've played 3 full seasons. Think about someone like Jahan Dotson. That's the perfect example of generally these guys play 4 years in college. 2.5 years for Sky Moore. Still gets the round 2 draft capital. I'm convinced he would have been a clear-cut round 1 pick if he stayed an extra year, but I'm glad he came out early. I'm glad we're getting the discount because he was only drafted in round 2. This is the guy that can win on the outside. He can win in the slot. He is the most versatile player now in this offense, and he is fully primed to help you win your league down the stretch.
Yeah, agree. And if you don't agree with all of that, again, reception perception is also super high on him at how well he gets open. He was literally the best wide receiver charted in this draft class at beating zone coverage. He was the second best behind only Chris Olave in beating man coverage. Like, this guy is amazing at football. Take the injury discount with the hamstring. And again, Juju's yards per route run has gone down 5 straight years. I know people want to make the argument that's all tied to Big Ben, but how about Deontay Johnson, only producing with Big Ben and running similar routes and running those short routes that everyone likes to say Juju runs? Like, Big Ben has supported fantasy options, both in the running game, the passing game, whatever the last few years. That is not the reason that people should be talking about Juju's yards per route run going down. I'm with you. I absolutely love Sky Moore, but almost as much as I love the tight end that I have today in Cole Kmet. Cole Kmet is the tight end that I think I'm ready to kind of plant my flag on at this point. I have all these breakout tight ends. Like, I just can't get enough. And maybe I'm just a psychopath for going after these guys on the Bears offense. But again, we've talked about this so many times, but the Bears lost their 4th, 5th, and 3rd leading target getters. It's 150 targets gone alone. He was already top 10 in targets, air yards, and he was 11th in target share in 2021. And the thing, I know everyone knows, I don't need to tell anybody that he didn't score a touchdown last year, but he still had a 19.7% red zone target share. He was getting the targets in the red zone, and their tight ends were actually scoring in the red zone. The rest of the tight ends on this roster scored 6 touchdowns on 34 targets. And there are a lot worse players than Cole Kmet, where Cole Kmet had no touchdowns on 94 targets, less competition this year. Justin Fields, you would think, will get better going into his second year. Oh, and should I also mention real quick that Cole Kmet is 22 years old, going on 23. And usually, Josh, if they're a pretty solid player, players usually get better, from year 22 to year 23 in their life. You got better at everything that you're doing in year 22 or 23. I'll get there. We'll hope I get better and I don't stagnate. But usually players get better. Justin Fields will get better. Cole Kmet's going to get better. And there's less target competition. And over 80% of tight ends all time to get over 100 targets have finished as a top 5 tight end in fantasy football. Cole Kmet was pretty close. So if he gets that 100 targets, he's going to have to be a big outlier, and he's going to have to not improve, and Justin Fields is going to have to not improve. I think Cole Kmet is being slept on with this offense. I think that he's going to do really well this year as long as he can find his way to the end zone.
You said that beautifully. He was another guy that I actually, spoiler alert, will not be talking about any tight ends on today's podcast because Cole Kmet would have been my tight end.
Yeah.
So yeah, the only thing I'll add in terms of like the analog where I said, think about DeAndre Swift last year for Travis Etienne this year. I really like to think about when George Kittle broke out.
Oh,
obviously Kittle is better than Kmet. We do not need Kmet to have the 1,300 yard season that Kittle had when he broke out. That is not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is situationally, there were a few similarities where it's a stinky offense. People did not want to invest in it. It was not the San Francisco 49ers offense of today. No one at the time was like, oh, you just have to have pieces of that Niners offense. This was pre-Debo, pre-Ayuk, all that stuff.
Yep.
And Kittle crushed because he just got force-fed targets. It turned out Kittle was also good enough to get the targets. I think Kmet is good enough to get the targets as well. And that's the kind of upside that you're looking for. I do not think he has 1,300 yard upside like Kittle. He is not as good after the catch. He is not as good, honestly, anywhere. However, you don't need that where he's going. It just shows you this is kind of what can happen when the situational factors align. And even if it's a bad offense, when the guy's good enough to command targets and there are targets to be commanded.
Yep. Exactly. No, I'm totally with you. Again, he's not going to be George Kittle, but I think he could be George Kittle light, where he finishes a top 6 or 7 tight end next year if he can fall into the end zone a few times or even higher. Who knows? But again, Cole Kmet, someone that we both believe in. But let's move on to our fourth.
Well, actually, before we do that, I've got a question for you.
Yeah.
These guys go like 7 rounds apart.
Yep.
How much, if we have 100 percentage points, what percent chance does TJ Hawkinson have more targets than Cole Kmet? Because they go like 7 rounds apart.
than Cole, more targets than Cole Kmet.
Like I think Hawkinson probably has more targets. I would put it at like I don't know. I would say 60% chance Hawkinson has more targets than Cole Kmet.
Does 60% chance? I think it might be lower than that, honestly. I mean, Cole Kmet had 94 targets last year. I mean, Hawkinson had 84 in 12 games. I think that's 7 a game if I'm doing the math right off the top of my head. Where Cole Kmet had 93 in 17. Okay, that's a big difference. 93 in 17 games is 5.4. Okay, that's a big difference. So I'd say yeah, 60-40. I think that's a good way to put it. Assuming they both get a little bit better. Hawkinson, has a little more target competition. Should Amon-Ra St. Brown be good and DeAndre Swift stay healthy, and I don't think DJ Chark is going to steal targets, but again, it's closer than you think, and that's why that 7th round ADP is where we can take a lot advantage. But I really like that for this year, and I really like what I'm about to hear with your 4th must-have player. I will let you lead it off.
So I found out pre-show that you recently wrote a thread that included this guy in it. I made what was sort of spicy and controversial TikTok a few weeks ago that I 100% still stand behind. I said, here is the latest wide receiver that's going in fantasy drafts, who I think realistically can be a wide receiver 1, a top 12 wide receiver. People did not like to hear it because he is not on a good offense. He was not a good prospect. All this stuff. It's Kadarius Toney. And people say, do you remember how bad he was as a prospect? How hilarious it was that the Giants took him in the 1st round? Yes, he was a bad prospect. Yes, the Giants should never have taken him in the 1st round. It does not matter if he ends up being a superstar going forward. With that profile, he should not have been a round 1 pick. I'm with everyone on all of that. What was the big problem with Kadarius Toney? He has terrible route running. He can't catch the ball. And you generally want your 1st round pick at wide receiver to have a history of crisp route running and crisp ball catching. What did Kadarius Toney do in year 1 as a rookie? He showed that he can run NFL routes and catch the football. He had the 7th highest targets per route run in the NFL last season among wide receivers. And that right there is all that you really need to know. Anyone that has an elite targets per route run like that has to be good at football. He was playing quite a few snaps. I understand that there were some injuries. He didn't play a full rookie season, but we had several hundred snaps, several hundred routes, and still the 7th highest targets per route run. This was a guy that he was just getting open at too high of a rate. They couldn't help but to throw to him. We already knew from college that he is one of the 2, 3, 4 most dangerous players after the catch. We already knew that. So if you're now telling me that he demonstrated he could be the 7th most highly targeted wide receiver per route in the NFL, to couple with him being a human joystick after the catch, I want Kadarius Toney. Doesn't matter. He could be going 5th, 6th round. I would still take some Kadarius Toney. This is the type of player you want exposure to. You can generally get him in the 9th or 10th round. It
gets better. Can I add on to your argument real quick of why you should be adding him in the 6th round? Well, Kadarius Toney was a 1st round wide receiver. And did you know, Josh, that 92% of 1st round wide receivers to have over 2 yards per route run later finished as a top 12 wide receiver? So I'm in one wide receiver ever to hit these marks in year 1 to not later finish as a top 12 wide receiver in fantasy. He's also targeted, like you said, at the 7th highest rate. But there's more. Last year in the NFL, Kadarius Toney was one of 6 wide receivers in the league to average over 2.2 yards per route run and a 30% target share when active. The other 5, Antonio Brown, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown, and Deontay Hardy. I know Deontay Hardy isn't that great, but that is an elite list. 30% target share when active. Oh, there's one thing I forgot to mention about that one of 6 wide receivers in the NFL to do it. Kadarius Toney was the only rookie. He's the only rookie on that list. And you could argue that, the other 5 players not named Deontay Hardy were amazing. Antonio Brown, Devontae Adams, Cooper Kupp, A.J. Brown. All amazing talents that have all finished as very top level fantasy football wide receivers. Kadarius Toney is on these lists for a reason. And he's only going to get better going into year 2.
Yeah, he was super raw as a prospect. That's part of why I was like, how are you taking this 4-year player in college who's still raw in the 1st round?
Yep.
I think he's going to be a lot better this year. Will he be the 7th most targeted receiver? Probably not.
Yeah.
I don't quite think he keeps up that kind of pace because that was skewed by his one game where he had almost 200 receiving yards. That definitely played a part in it. However, that shows what his potential is because he actually did it. It's not like we're saying, oh, he has the potential to be a wide receiver 1 on a per target basis with his efficiency metrics. No, he just showed us that as a rookie.
Yep.
When we already knew he was raw, he was in a terrible offensive environment and still found a way to be productive. I'm investing in Kadarius Toney. He's got the Bills coaching staff is now there. Probably going to be pretty pass heavy.
Yeah.
Probably going to run some pretty smart plays.
Probably.
I know everyone laughed at the Giants last year because they had that one play where they were on like their own 4-yard line and it was 3rd and 9 and they ran the ball up the middle. And it was like, wow, this is just a team that doesn't want to play football. We are not going to see that this year. The team's going to be much better. They're going to be better coached. And I think after the Jaguars, the Giants are going to be the next best team, I think, in terms of huge steps forward, purely just by having a competent offensive play caller on the roster.
And it's probably the most competent offensive line that we've seen in the last 5 years. Maybe this will be the first fully healthy Saquon we've seen in the last couple of years. All those things will also help as well. I think one of my players similar to Toney that I'm going to be the most above the field on, probably one of the players that I'm the most above the field on this year. This is the guy that, almost and still subject to change could be my flag plant this year, and it's Trey Lance. Like Trey Lance this year could just be what Jalen Hurts was last year on steroids. Like he could be just Jalen Hurts with really great weapons. Because I know that people are going to be like, oh, Trey Lance, he played 1 season in college and this guy can't throw the ball. But that was the whole argument around Jalen Hurts last year is this guy can't throw the ball. But when Trey Lance is on the field, he scored at least 15 fantasy points in all 3 games that he played in. He has insane weapons with Kittle, Ayuk, and probably Debo. Still has a good offensive line, but the biggest thing in that super small sample size, he averaged over 10 rush attempts per game. But he doesn't need to average 10 rush attempts per game. It all goes back to, over the last decade, Josh, 19 of 22 quarterbacks that have averaged over 4.5 rush attempts per game were a top 8 QB in points per game. The only guys to not be a top 8 QB in points per game and average more than 4.5 rush attempts per game, which I think everyone agreed Trey Lance will do, was 2012 Tim Tebow, 2014 Colin Kaepernick, and 2020 Cam Newton. So basically what this is saying is that as long as he's not one of those guys, he will be a top 8 QB in fantasy points per game. And also, Tebow, Kaepernick, Cam Newton, none of those guys had George Kittle, Brandon Ayuk, and Trey Lance. And Deebo Samuel. But here's the thing. If you combine all that stuff, the fact that he's automatically going to be good if he runs the ball, imagine if he's good at football. If he's just straight up good at football, and he's the guy that every single teammate that they could talk to on these camps of saying this guy is going to be special, this guy is going to be insane this year, similar to what they said about Lamar Jackson in 2019 and Patrick Mahomes in 2018, that all the teammates were like, this guy is going to be special. Trey Lance could be really special this year, and I think that he literally has overall QB1 in his range of outcomes. Unlikely? Yes. Probably a 2% chance? Yes. But is it possible? Yes. Could you get a guy with that range of outcomes in like the 12th or 13th round of your fantasy drafts? Yes. Draft Trey Lance. I cannot say it enough. I know this is one of the players that you would have had on your list if I didn't for sure. Trey Lance should be like your most heavily drafted player in all your fantasy football leagues, period.
So Jalen Hurts last year was the QB6 per game, and he was certifiably not good at all as a passer with bad weapons. So Trey Lance, if he is certifiably bad as a passer with bad weapons, he could be like the QB6 per game, just like Jalen Hurts. But one thing we know for certain is that he does have good weapons with Debo, Ayuk, and Kittle. And yeah, what if he ends up being good at football? Right now, his ADP to me suggests that people think he has bad weapons, people think he is bad at football, and people think he's not going to play the full season. Garoppolo he's not going to be on the roster. I understand Garoppolo is currently on the roster. However, he had surgery. He hasn't been able to throw yet. Once he starts throwing, then he can be traded. We just saw Baker traded to the Panthers. Good enough quarterbacks to be at least close to league average will be playing starter snaps this season. It happens every year. You want to know why people still freak out about how Tannehill came out of nowhere and resurrected his career and became a good starting quarterback? It's because you generally don't find those guys as backup quarterbacks. The good quarterbacks that are one of the 32 best quarterbacks in the NFL, they play starter snaps. Garoppolo is not going to be on this roster. It's going to be the Trey Lance show. And you just need so many things to go impossibly wrong for him to have this pick not pay off in fantasy. My favorite Trey Lance stat. This might be my favorite stat ever for Lance, no matter what he does the rest of his career. In his first NFL start, he had more rush attempts, 16, than completions, 15. If that doesn't get you excited about fantasy football, then I don't know what does.
And, how about another thing? Remember where you said that he was a rookie last year? Rookie? Mm-hmm. Yeah. So over the last decade, 10 years, Trey Lance had the 5th highest fantasy points per dropback in a season of all time. 5th highest over that last 10 years. 3 of the 4 other seasons above him were Lamar Jackson. It's Taysom Hill, Lamar, Trey Lance, Deshaun Watson, Cam Newton in 2015, Robert Griffin III in 2015.
Yeah, I like the sound of that. I mean, we just talked about how Lamar Jackson's going to smash this year, and Trey Lance is like probably not going to be quite as close to Lamar, but I think they're going to be within like 2 fantasy points a game of each other.
Yeah, but he doesn't need to be. But the thing is, that list right there was all guys that were elite fantasy producers. That doesn't mean they're good quarterbacks. Doesn't mean Robert Griffin III was a good quarterback or Taysom Hill, but they are elite fantasy producers. And when those guys are on the field, they put up ridiculous numbers of fantasy points. That's what Trey Lance is going to do this year. We've talked enough about him. We can move on to our final must-have players of the day today. I will lead off with you, Josh. Who is your final player we are talking about on the show?
So I'm going to talk a little bit about Leonard Fournette for a second. So Leonard Fournette is awesome. I think he's a great pick in the second round. Leonard Fournette, I think, is one of the best running backs in the NFL. A lot of people say, Josh, that sounds controversial. Look at the advanced metrics. How can you possibly say Leonard Fournette is one of the best running backs in the NFL? And to that I say, well, I think the best talent evaluator in the NFL is Tom Brady. He's played in the NFL the longest. If there is someone that knows good play at every position, I don't think you'd be hard pressed to say, like, I don't trust Tom Brady's intuition. The guy knows ball. Leonard Fournette has been playing such ridiculous snap shares with the Buccaneers. We haven't seen anything like this with Tom Brady since Corey Dillon, like 15 years ago. Brady never trusts running backs to be out there constantly for him, where Leonard Fournette, he's good in the run game. He's good in the pass game. He's a pass blocker. All he does is score fantasy points. Only Jonathan Taylor had more fantasy points in the second half of last season. Do you really want Leonard Fournette? The bell cow role is his. Also, though, every single year of his career, Leonard Fournette has missed games. Every single year. He's going to get a really heavy workload. It's probably going to break him at some point. It has every year so far. Why not again when he's just a year older? Who is behind him on the depth chart? A guy with a skill set that looks strikingly similar to Leonard Fournette's, but maybe even better. In one of the final rounds of your fantasy draft, just always push the button on Rachaad White. If there was one player where I said you need 100%, if I had to choose a player to have 100% exposure to, obviously it would be a later round pick, because I think it'd be kind of silly to say like, oh, I am just forcing this second round pick on my team every time, because if they get injured, your team is screwed. But if we're talking about a guy that goes in the 12th, 13th round, I'm going to push the lock button. If I had to choose 100% exposure for one guy, it would be Rachaad White. Rachaad White is pretty big, 215 pounds. He's explosive. He ran in the 4.4s. He's a ridiculously good pass catcher. He had nearly a 20% target share in college. He had 10 yards per reception as a senior at Arizona State. Some people say, that's a bad stat, yards per reception. Well, what does that indicate? It indicates to me that he was catching long passes. And it's because he lined up wide. If you look at his alignment, this was not purely a running back. This was a full-fledged weapon. A guy that would often line up outside, like Le'Veon Bell did it in his prime, like Austin Eckler still does from time to time. This is the type of player that you want in fantasy. If Rachaad White starts any games, which he's going to, Fournette's going to get injured at some point, he is going to be a locked and loaded top 3 option at the position. It would not shock me if the games that Fournette misses, Rachaad White is the number 1 scoring running back in all of fantasy football. This is exactly the archetype you want. He's big. He's fast. He catches passes. He had over 1,000 rushing yards as a senior. The guy literally does it all. Tom Brady is not going to want to take him off the field when Leonard Fournette gets injured.
I bet I can give you 3 better stats than anything you just ever named about Rachaad White. You just made a great case. I bet I can give you 3 stats in a row that are better than any argument you just made.
Yeah.
Yes,
challenge is accepted. Let's hear it.
Challenge accepted. Power 5 running backs that averaged over 90 rush yards a game and 40 receiving yards in a game in a season. 5 ever to do it. Christian McCaffrey, Todd Gurley, Saquon Barkley, Joe Mixon, and Rachaad White. Rachaad White in 2021 also had the 6th highest PFF receiving grade of all time. Christian McCaffrey, Alvin Kamara, Austin Eckler, all rank in the top 4 of all time. Still not convinced? Well, Rachaad White last year also had the 5th highest yards per route run of all time in college in 2021. The 4 players to rank above him: Christian McCaffrey, Travis Etienne, Joe Mixon, and Curtis Samuel, who is now a wide receiver. All elite company, all elite stats, all point to him breaking out this year if Leonard Fournette misses a game. And also, you know what's kind of interesting about maybe why he might not play all the games this year? We haven't seen a 27-plus-year-old running back finish in the top 6 of fantasy football in 5 years. I don't think Leonard Fournette is going to be the guy to break that. Leonard Fournette did it last year. I don't think he does it this year. If he misses a game, Rachaad White season, baby.
Yeah, this is one of the. I've been so anti-handcuff my whole career in this industry, but man, I think you're doing quite all right if you take Fournette in the 2nd and Rachaad White in like the 13th round of your fantasy draft. I would say that's A-okay. I just really don't see a world where you're not getting top 5 running back production every single week. And I think there's a potential for both of them to be fantasy relevant each week. We just saw like 30 to 35 fantasy points being clustered in that offense week to week down the stretch when some of their receivers got injured. So I think there's a really good shot that if you draft both of them, there's potential that you're flexing White because it's Evans, Gage, and then Fournette and White as the next guys up in the passing game. Wouldn't surprise me if they're lining Rachaad White up out wide in the slot, just trying to get that guy on the field because we know Brady loves Fournette. We know what White's capable of. He got the 3rd round draft capital. There's just too many paths to him succeeding as a rookie. And when he's basically free, you just need to be heavily overweight on Rachaad White. Like if last year happens and Fournette misses the final few games of the season, Rachaad White is literally winning you leagues. We saw it like Gio, Vonnie Bernard, Keyshawn Vaughn be fantasy relevant towards down the stretch there. Rachaad White's going to give you 20 to 25 fantasy points a game if he's the starter. You can book it.
I love it. I'm all in on it. I love it with Rachaad White. My final player for today that I'm going to talk about, also a running back, not a handcuff, but someone that you should be drafting in every single fantasy football league possible, is Breece Hall. You heard me mention this at the top of the show with Travis Etienne. Breece Hall is one of 6 running backs to ever get a 99 elite grade from Next Gen Stats. The other 5, once again, the other company that he's among: Jonathan Taylor, Saquon Barkley, Melvin Gordon, Nick Chubb, Travis Etienne, and Breece Hall. Besides the 2 guys that haven't played, Taylor, Barkley, Melvin Gordon, Nick Chubb, 3 of those 4 running backs have had a top 5 season in fantasy. The only one who hasn't is Nick Chubb, who might arguably be the most talented running back in the entire league. He's just not getting the volume. Elite talents at running back. That is where Breece Hall finished, according to Next Gen Stats. He's also had the 2nd highest RAS score since 2006. That's basically saying that he's the 2nd most athletic running back since 2006. That's pretty good. Well, how about the fact that, we've seen rookie running backs have a lot of success and people are a little fading them too much. There's been a rookie running back to finish in the top 6 in 4 of the last 5 years. A rookie running back has finished in the top 10 in 9 of the last 10 years. And a rookie running back has finished inside the top 15 at the position for 10 straight years. Who's going to do it this year? Tyler Algier? Dameon Pierce? Kenneth Walker? No! It's going to be Breece Hall. Next Gen Stats show the talent. history speaks in terms of running backs finishing high. Once again, he will be a historical outlier if he does not finish in the top 15 in fantasy football this year. Mark it down for Breece Hall.
I like Breece Hall. I don't have too much to add to that. The only thing I'll say is for people hung up on Michael Carter's pass catching, if you just look at their college stats, college target shares, you'll see that Breece Hall is actually probably just the better receiver in a vacuum. Just in terms of getting open and catching the ball. And then I don't think it's any argument who you want to have the ball in their hands at that point. But I think there's a good chance Breece Hall just out targets him, in addition to obviously out carrying him. I really like Breece Hall. I think he's going in a really good range where you're basically drafting him at his floor. He's getting drafted as an RB2. I think he's going to be an RB2 at the very least. Something happens to Michael Carter, or he just flat out outplays him in every aspect of the field. Now you've got an RB1. He's explosive. He catches passes. He can handle 20 plus touches a game.
Yep.
I'm in.
Agree. Nothing more said. Mic drop. Absolutely love it. And Josh, I've absolutely loved getting to talk some football with you. Having you on the show today has been so amazing. Before we go, you're the fantasy and betting, gambling director at the 33rd team now. You're doing a lot of great stuff. You're hiring a lot of really great people right now. So please, where can we find you, all your amazing work, and the amazing team that you are building?
Well, first off, I want to say that your challenge before with, I'm going to give you 3 better Rachaad White stats. I talked with the judges. They deliberated. I was actually pretty pissed off at the decision. They gave the edge to you. So congratulations.
Thank you.
So you can find anything I'm doing. It'll be on Twitter at JLarkyTweets. You can catch me on TikTok at JLarky TikToks. And you can find all my work coming up soon on the33rdteam.com. And that's 33rd, 33RD. So the33rdteam.com. You'll be able to see all my work. We are redesigning the site right now. It's almost done. I've been hiring some really, really sharp individuals. We're going to have a ton of content coming very, very soon. We're going to have a lot of really, really unique and innovative tools for you to use. And I think the best part of all of it, it'll be free for you this summer. Let's go. And once you get hooked on our tools and you want to use them in season, it's also going to be free for the 2022 season. So make that your new hub for all your research, content, watching, content, reading, whatever it is. The 33rd team couldn't be more excited to be hiring and leading that department. Thanks for having me on, Alex. I think is this my 4th show that I've hopped on?
Yeah, I think it's the 4th
we're at number 4. Yeah, we've done a lot of these. Really just anytime you DM me, I'm like, yes, I would love to talk some fantasy. So your process gets better every single month. And everyone that's listened to you, I think already knows this, but if you have some newer listeners that are tuning in, go back, listen to an early episode of the Fresh Fantasy Podcast. It's still good, but wow, will you see the crazy strides that Alex has made? This guy is still in college. The sky's the limit for him, just like Sky Moore. So thank you.
No, I appreciate the kind words. Humbled to do it, obviously. But again, hey, I'm just here to talk football. I appreciate the kind words, obviously, and I think we've definitely made improvements. But you're gassing me up too much. I've just gotten to learn from you and a lot of other cool people, and I'm very thankful to do so. But more than that, I'm just thankful to have you listeners listening to the Fresh Fantasy Podcast today. It's been such a blast talking football with you guys and Josh and myself. Talking about some must-have players has been such a ride today. But before we go, also, at this point in the show, if you're still listening, it's a good thing because we have a little giveaway that I'm going to announce for the first time live on the podcast. Ooh. For the first time ever, we are doing a Fresh Fantasy giveaway of a give back, a free NFL jersey of your choice. The only thing has to be a player from a current NFL team. I will get any jersey, buy it, ship it to your house completely on me for free. Josh, you can participate in this. The only thing that you have to do, this will take you 1 minute, is go onto the Fresh Fantasy Podcast on Apple Podcasts or your favorite podcast platform, submit a written 5-star review and send it to me at Alex Caruso or tweet out a picture and tag me in it, and I will keep track of it, put it, and we are doing a drawing at the end of July. All you have to do, takes 1 minute, leave a 5-star review, and you'll be entered in to win a current NFL jersey from me shipped straight to your house, apartment, to your Sky Moore bandwagon shop, wherever that is, anywhere. So keep that in mind. But as always, Josh, been a pleasure to have you. And it's just been an even bigger pleasure to talk football with you today. So as always, don't forget, please leave a review. You guys already know what to do. And I hope you all have a great rest of your day.